Picture the road just after sunrise. It is cool, the kind of morning where the air still carries the night chill, and a small group of tired men is walking the path that drops down from the village of Bethany toward the great city below. One of them is hungry. He has not eaten, and his stomach knows it. And as they walk, he sees it in the distance, off to the side of the road, standing tall and proud and covered in leaves. A fig tree, full and green and shouting to anyone with eyes that here, right here, is breakfast. So he turns toward it. The others watch him go, expecting nothing more than a simple roadside meal. And then something happens that none of them will ever forget. He reaches the tree, he searches the branches, and he finds nothing. Not a single fig, only leaves. And the gentle teacher who blessed children, who fed 5,000 people with a boy's lunch, who calmed storms and touched lepers, opens his mouth and speaks not a blessing but a curse. May no one ever eat fruit from you again. Now here is the detail almost every reader skips right past. The text tells us, almost as an aside, that it was not the season for figs. Read that again slowly. It was not the time for figs. So the obvious question rises up like a hand in the back of the classroom. Why would a perfectly fair and perfectly loving man curse a tree for failing to do something it was not even supposed to be doing yet? That little phrase is a clue, hidden in plain sight, like a letter lying open on a table that no one notices precisely because it is too obvious. And once you understand why it is there, you cannot read the Gospels the same way again. Because this is the one and only destructive miracle in the entire ministry of Jesus. He never withered a person, never blasted an enemy, never called down fire the way his disciples once wanted him to. He healed and multiplied and raised the dead. And the single time he ever used his power to destroy something, he aimed it at a fruitless tree. This is the one moment where Jesus stops teaching about fruitfulness and starts performing it, turning a roadside tree into a living sermon about the deadly distance between leaves and figs, between the appearance of life and the reality of it. Stay with me, because this story is not really about a plant at all. It is about something that looks alive from a distance and turns out to be hiding an emptiness up close. And by the end, the question this story asks is going to land a lot closer to home than you expect. So let us set the scene properly, because the timing of this matters more than most people realize. We are in the final week of the life of Jesus, roughly the year 30 of the Common Era, give or take a year or two, depending on how the scholars count. This is not some random afternoon in Galilee early in his ministry. This is the last full week before the cross. The day before, he had ridden into Jerusalem on a donkey while crowds threw down their cloaks and waved branches and shouted Hosanna. And now, the very next morning, he is walking back into the city, and the fig tree stands between Bethany and the gates. The geography is intimate and specific. Bethany sat on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives, a small village maybe 2 miles from Jerusalem, an easy morning walk downhill toward the temple. This was the home turf of his friends, the place where Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived, the place he stayed at night during that crushing final week, rather than inside the crowded watching city. So this road was familiar ground. He had walked it many times, and on this particular morning he walked it hungry. The political air was thick with tension. Judea was an occupied territory, sitting under the heavy boot of Rome. The Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, held the real power of life and death. A puppet ruler named Herod Antipas played at being king, and the whole arrangement was a powder keg, because it was Passover, the great national feast that celebrated the day God broke the chains of Egypt and brought his people out to freedom. During Passover, the population of Jerusalem swelled enormously, pilgrims streaming in from every corner of the empire, packing the streets, filling the inns, crowding the temple courts. A city already nervous became a city ready to ignite. The Romans knew it. That is exactly why Pilate came up from the coast with extra soldiers at Passover to keep the lid on the pot. And at the centre of it all stood the temple. Not the modest first temple of Solomon, long since destroyed, but the second temple, magnificently expanded by Herod the Great into one of the architectural wonders of the ancient world. Gleaming white stone and gold that caught the sun so brightly that travellers said you had to look away. But step into the outer court, the court of the Gentiles, and you would find something that did not match the splendour. You would find a marketplace, money changers seated at their tables, merchants selling doves, the noise and smell of livestock. There was a practical reason for all of it. The temple tax could not be paid with ordinary Roman coins, because those coins carried the image of Caesar and the claim that Caesar was divine, and you could not bring that into the house of God. So you had to exchange your money for acceptable temple currency. And the money changers, well, let us just say they did not run this service out of pure devotion. The exchange rate had a way of favouring the man with the table. And then there is a fact about figs that you simply have to understand, or none of this makes sense. The fig trees of Israel work in an unusual way. Before the broad leaves fully open, the tree produces small early fruit buds, little green knobs the Hebrews called pagim. These early figs appear first and then come the leaves. So a fig tree in full leaf is making a public announcement. It is saying, in effect, there is fruit here, come and eat. The ripe, sweet figs of the main harvest came later in the year, true, but a tree dressed in full foliage in the spring should at least have those early pagim clinging to its branches, an edible promise of more to come. A fig tree covered in leaves with absolutely nothing underneath was behaving like a student who turns in a beautifully decorated cover page wrapped around a completely blank notebook. All show, no substance. The leaves were writing a check the tree could not cash. So hold that picture in your mind, because it is the key that unlocks everything. This tree was not innocent. That is the first thing we have to get straight, because most people instinctively feel sorry for the poor tree. They imagine Jesus stomping up to some sleepy little sapling, minding its own business and blasting it out of spite. That is not what happened. The tree had done something. It had made a claim. By standing there in full leaf while every other fig tree was still bare, it had advertised itself as the one tree on the whole road that had fruit ready early. It promised. And when the hungry traveller took it at its word and came close, the promise turned out to be a lie. There was nothing there but greenery. This is exactly why the little note about the season matters so much, the very clue we started with. People read it was not the season for figs and conclude the tree is off the hook, but flip it around. If it was not the season for figs, then why was this tree the only one wearing the full uniform of fruitfulness? Its leaves were out of step with its honesty. Every other tree along that road was telling the truth by standing bare. This one was lying with its leaves. It looked like the most alive, most productive, most fruitful tree on the entire path, and it was the emptiest of all. Now you see why Jesus singled it out. Listen to the way Mark records the moment. This is Mark chapter 11, verses 12 through 14, and the words go like this. On the next day, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry, and seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. Notice that last line. His disciples heard it. Mark wants you to know there were witnesses. This was not a private moment of frustration. This was a public act with an audience, the way a teacher does something on purpose so that the students will remember it later. So what was Jesus condemning? Not the absence of ripe summer figs in the spring. He knew the calendar better than anyone. He was condemning the contradiction. He was condemning a thing that broadcasts life on the outside while carrying barrenness on the inside. He was reacting to the gap between the advertisement and the inventory. And if that sounds harsh for a tree, that is because the tree was never really the point. The tree was a prop. It was a visual aid. It was a sermon he could walk up to and touch. Here is where that word pagim earns its place in the story. Pagim means those tiny unripe early figs that show up before the leaves and grow alongside them. They are not the gourmet harvest. They are not sweet and soft and ready for a feast. They are small and green and a little bitter, but they are real. They are honest fruit. A hungry man on a road would happily eat them. They are proof that the tree is actually doing the work it was made to do. And the absence of even one single pagim, when the leaves were already fully out, was the loudest possible confession that this tree was all signal and no substance. It is the difference between a beautiful gift box tied with ribbon that rattles empty when you shake it, and a plain box that actually has something inside. It is the difference between a resume crowded with impressive words and a person who has never put in a single real day of the work those words describe. Leaves promised pagim, the branches delivered nothing, and the hungry searched and went away with empty hands. Now look at where Jesus is standing when he does this, and notice that he does not stop walking after he curses the tree. He keeps moving straight down the road toward the gates of the city, toward that gleaming white temple, with the words of the curse still hanging in the morning air behind him. Because the tree was only the first half of what he came to say that morning. Mark, the master storyteller, is about to do something with the structure of his gospel that, once you see it, you will never be able to unsee. And here is the literary fingerprint of Mark, the thing that proves this was never about a snack. Mark loves to do something the scholars call intercalation, though you can just call it making a sandwich. He starts one story, then he interrupts it with a completely different story, and then he comes back and finishes the first one, and he does this on purpose because the two stories are meant to interpret each other. The filling explains the bread, and the bread explains the filling. You're supposed to read them as one unit. So watch what Mark does here. He shows you Jesus cursing the fig tree. Then right in the middle he takes you into the temple, and only after the temple scene does he bring you back the next morning to the dead tree. Curse the tree. Cleanse the temple. Find the tree withered. The tree wraps around the temple like two slices of bread around the meat, and the message could not be clearer. What Jesus does to the tree is what Jesus is saying about the temple, so follow him through the gates and into that outer court. The noise hits first. Coins clinking on tables, merchants calling out prices, the bleating of sheep and the cooing of caged doves, the press of a Passover crowd, and the gentle teacher who wept over this city walks into the middle of it, and the gentleness gives way to something fierce. Listen to Mark chapter 11 verses 15 through 17, and the text reads like this: "And they came to Jerusalem. And he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, 'Is it not written, My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers.'" Now notice the two scriptures Jesus stitches together in that one sentence, because he is not improvising. He is quoting the prophets. The first half comes from Isaiah chapter 56 verse 7, where God declares that his house will be a house of prayer for all the nations. That phrase, "for all the nations," matters enormously, because the very court that had been turned into a livestock market and a currency exchange was the court of the Gentiles, the one space in the entire temple where a non-Jewish seeker could come and pray. The one doorway for the outsider had been crammed full of cattle pens and cash tables. The house of prayer for all the nations had no room left for the nations to pray. And then he fires the second barrel, straight from Jeremiah chapter 7 verse 11. "You have made it a den of robbers." And here the original language sharpens the blade. The Greek word behind robbers is listes, and a listes is not a sneaky little pickpocket who lifts your coin purse in the market. A listes is a violent bandit, an armed insurrectionist, the kind of man who hides in a cave in the hills and comes down with a weapon. It is the same word the Romans used for the rebels and revolutionaries they crucified. So when Jesus calls the temple a den of listes, he's not merely accusing the merchants of overcharging, though they certainly did that. He's saying the holiest place in the nation has become a hideout, a fortress where corrupt men shelter behind religious walls while doing violence to the very purpose of the house. A den is where robbers retreat to feel safe after the robbery. The temple had become the safe house for a spiritual crime, and do you see it now? Do you see why Mark wrapped this scene inside the fig tree? The temple on that morning was the fig tree. Stand back and look at it from a distance, and it was the most magnificently fruitful religious institution on earth. Full leaves everywhere, priests in their robes moving through the courts, smoke rising from a constant stream of sacrifices, the smell of incense, the sound of the Levite choirs, the daily rhythm of an ancient worship machine running at full capacity. By every external measure it looked spectacularly alive. It was covered, head to foot, in leaves, and the Messiah, the one the whole system was supposed to be pointing toward, walked up to it hungry, searching for fruit, and he found tables and livestock and exchange rates that favoured the man with the table. He found leaves. He found no figs. The temple was making the same claim the tree had made and telling the same lie. There is something almost painfully human in the detail about the money changers. The temple tax had to be paid in approved currency, and the pilgrims came carrying coins from every province in the empire. Somebody had to exchange it. Fine. But the exchange came with a fee, and the fee came with a markup, and the markup multiplied across hundreds of thousands of Passover pilgrims, and suddenly the house of prayer had a very healthy revenue stream. They had figured out how to monetize the front door to God, and the men running it would have told you, with a perfectly straight face, that they were facilitating worship. This is the word hieron, by the way, the Greek term for the whole temple complex, the buildings and the courts, and the great structure Herod had raised. Hold on to that word, because it is going to matter in a few minutes when we discover what Jesus said the real Hieron actually was. For now, just sit with the picture. The biggest, busiest, most impressive house of worship in the ancient world, and the Lord of that house walks in and finds it fruitless. If this connection, this link between the dead tree and the cleansed temple, as a single message in two scenes, is opening up these chapters in a way you have not seen before, then let me ask a small favour. Help us get this in front of someone else who would love it. Subscribe, leave a comment, even a single word, and share this with a friend who reads the Gospels. That is genuinely how more people find studies like this one. Thank you for being here and for sitting with this story. But this tree is far older than the temple in the imagination of Israel, and that is the next thing you need to understand, because Jesus did not pick the fig tree at random. Of all the trees he could have walked up to that morning, of all the images he could have chosen, he chose the one tree that the prophets had been using as a portrait of the nation for centuries. The fig tree was Israel. When the Old Testament wanted a picture of the covenant people, flourishing or failing, it reached again and again for the fig. Listen to how God speaks through the prophet Hosea. This is Hosea chapter 9, verse 10. And the words are these: like grapes in the wilderness, I found Israel. Like the first fruit on the fig tree in its first season, I saw your fathers. Do you hear the tenderness in that? God remembers the early days of his people, the way you remember the taste of the very first ripe fig of the season, that small, sweet shock of delight after a long wait. That is how God felt about Israel at the beginning. They were his early fruit, his pagim, his honest little promise of a great harvest to come. But the prophets also reached for the fig tree to describe what happened when that promise went unfulfilled. Hear Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 13. The text reads, "When I would gather them, declares the Lord, there are no grapes on the vine, nor figs on the fig tree. Even the leaves are withered." There it is again. God comes looking to gather fruit from his people, and he finds the branches bare. And listen to Joel chapter 1, verse 7, where the prophet describes the devastation of the land. He has laid waste my vine and splintered my fig tree. He has stripped off their bark and thrown it down. Their branches are made white. And there is one more, a verse that reads almost like a script for that morning on the Bethany Road. Micah chapter 7, verse 1. The prophet cries out, "Woe is me! For I have become as when the summer fruit has been gathered, as when the grapes have been gleaned. There is no cluster to eat, no first ripe fig that my soul desires." Hear that. No first ripe fig that my soul desires. A man walking through an orchard, hungry, his soul aching for the early fruit, and finding nothing. 700 years before Jesus stood under that tree, the prophet Micah had already written the scene. So when the Messiah walks up to a fig tree in full leaf during the final week of his life, in full view of his disciples, and finds it barren, and curses it, every person standing there who knew their scriptures should have felt a chill run down their spine. Because this was not a tree, this was a verdict, delivered in the oldest visual language Israel had. God had come once more looking for fruit on the fig tree of his people, and once more he found leaves. But here is the thing you must not miss, because it guards your heart against turning this into a story about a vengeful God who could not wait to swing the axe. God was not eager to destroy, he was aching to find fruit. The longing in those prophetic verses is not the longing of an executioner. It is the longing of a gardener who planted the tree himself and walks out morning after morning hoping today, there will be figs. Jesus told that exact story. It is in Luke chapter 13 verses 6 through 9, and it is the gentlest commentary imaginable on the cursing of the tree. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. So he said to the gardener, "Look, for 3 years now I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and I find none. Cut it down. Why should it use up the ground?" And the gardener answers him, "Sir, let it alone this year also, until I dig around it and put on manure. Then if it should bear fruit next year, well and good. But if not, you can cut it down." Do you hear the patience in that? The owner is ready to give up, and the gardener pleads for 1 more year. Dig around it, feed it, give it every chance. The God of the fig tree is not a God in a hurry to condemn. He is a God who sends the gardener to plead for 1 more season, and then another, long past the point any reasonable owner would have quit. This is the heart of the Hebrew word pri, which simply means fruit or fruitfulness. And it carries an echo that goes all the way back to the very first chapter of the Bible, to the garden, where God blessed his creatures and said, "Be fruitful." That phrase, "be fruitful," uses this same root idea of pre. From the beginning, the entire design of creation was that living things would produce, would bear, would give back life. Israel was planted to be pre, to bear fruit for the world, to be the family tree through which all the nations of the earth would be blessed. They were never meant to be ornamental. They were meant to feed the hungry traveller. And the tragedy the prophets keep returning to is a people who grew magnificent leaves and forgot how to grow figs. It is the difference between a tree planted in good soil with an expectation of harvest and a display of plastic fruit on the reception desk in an office lobby, glossy and convincing from across the room, and absolutely useless to anyone who is actually hungry. So the warning of the fig tree is not only ancient, it is pointed straight at us. Because it would be very comfortable to leave this story safely in the year 30, a tidy judgment on a temple that is long gone and a nation in a moment long past. But Jesus did not curse that tree so we could feel superior to the people who missed him. He cursed it so that everyone who would ever follow him, including you and me, would understand the one thing he is always, always looking for, not leaves, fruit. And this is exactly where the whole story turns, because if it ended with a dead tree, it would be the most hopeless passage in the Gospels. But watch what Jesus does next, the morning after, when his stunned disciples walk back down that same road. The tree is the prop for judgment, yes, but the disciples are not the tree. The disciples are about to be taught how to live. Hear Mark chapter 11, verses 20 through 25. As they passed by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. And Peter remembered and said to him, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." And Jesus answered them, "Have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' and does not doubt in his heart but believes that what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive, if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also, who is in heaven, may forgive you your trespasses." Now catch the contrast, because it is everything. Mark tells us the tree had withered away to its roots, from the roots up. The death went all the way down to the foundation, the hidden part, the part no one sees. And in the very same breath, Jesus turns to his disciples and starts teaching them about the hidden things that grow life. Faith that does not doubt in the heart being the hidden root of a person, prayer that believes before it sees, and forgiveness, the soil in which all of it grows, because he ties it right there. When you stand praying, forgive. The tree died from its roots because it had no real life underneath the leaves, and Jesus is essentially saying to his followers, do not be that tree. Do not build a life of leaves. Grow roots, real faith, real prayer, real forgiveness, down in the hidden places where no crowd can see, because that is where the fruit actually comes from. The roots of a tree are invisible, and yet they hold up and feed everything that is visible. He's calling them down into the unseen, and he gives them the secret of how, though not on this road. He would say it plainly a few nights later, in the upper room, on the last night before the cross. It is in John chapter 15, verses 1 through 5, and it is the answer to the fig tree. The words go like this: I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit he takes away, and every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself, unless it abides in the vine, neither can you, unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing. There is the key word, the one I asked you to hold on to earlier: abide. The Greek is meno, and it means to remain, to stay, to dwell, to make your home in. It is the exact opposite of putting out a fine show of leaves and moving on. Meno is what roots do. They stay put. They sink down. They draw their life from a source deeper than themselves. Jesus is telling them that the fruit he was looking for on that tree can never be manufactured by trying harder to produce figs. It only comes from staying connected to him, from meno, from abiding in the vine until his life flows up through you and the fruit appears almost on its own, the way ripe figs simply appear on a healthy branch. And this is where we have to make a careful distinction, because the temple was about to pass away, and people sometimes get confused about why. The temple system, with its sacrifices and its priesthood and its festivals, was always meant to point forward. All of that ceremonial machinery was like a signpost, a shadow cast backward in time by something that had not yet arrived. Every lamb on that altar was saying, "Look ahead, someone is coming," and when he came, the signpost had done its job. That is why the building, the hieron, could be left to wither, because the real thing had walked through its gates. Remember that word hieron, the temple complex. There is a second Greek word, nous, which means the inner sanctuary, the dwelling place of the divine presence itself. And early in his ministry, Jesus had said something that no one understood at the time. It is in John chapter 2, verses 19 through 21. "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The people thought he was talking about the building that had taken decades to build. But the text tells us plainly he was speaking about the nous of his body. The true dwelling place of God was never the stone structure on the hill. It was him. The temple of stone was leaves. The body of Christ was the figs. And what looks like judgment in this story, the tree withering, the temple emptying, is actually the shadow giving way to the substance, the signpost stepping aside because the destination has arrived. So let us go back to the road one more time, to the morning after. The same path down from Bethany, the same group of tired men, the same air cool from the night. But everything is different now. They are walking the route they walked yesterday, and as they come around the bend, they see it. The fig tree. And it is dead. Not wilting, not struggling. Dead, all the way down. The leaves that yesterday were broad and green and shouting with life now hang shriveled and brown. The branches have gone dry and brittle. Mark says it had withered away to its roots, which means the death did not start at the tips and work inward. It went straight to the bottom, to the hidden foundation, and killed the tree from the inside out, overnight. Yesterday, this tree was the loudest advertisement for life on the entire road. Today it is a corpse standing upright in the morning light, and the disciples stop. You can feel them stop. And it is Peter, of course it is Peter, who says out loud what all of them are thinking. "Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered." There is something almost childlike in it. The shock of a man pointing at a thing he cannot quite believe. Look. As if Jesus had not known. As if the word he spoke in passing yesterday had not been a sentence handed down by the judge of all the earth. They had heard him curse it. They had walked on, probably half wondering if their hungry teacher had simply spoken in frustration. And now, one sunrise later, the verdict had been carried out in full. The thing that looked most alive had proven to be the most dead. And the distance between those two mornings is the whole sermon. Now let the camera pull back from the dead tree, slowly, away from the branches, up over the road, until the whole city comes into view below. Because the tree is only the small picture. The large picture is the temple, gleaming white and gold in the valley, swarming with Passover pilgrims, running its sacrifices, burning its incense, looking for all the world like the most alive thing in the nation. And within one generation, within the lifetime of some of the men standing on that road, it would all be dead too. Around the year 70 of the Common Era, the Roman legions under the commander Titus would surround Jerusalem, break it, burn it, and tear the temple down to the ground. Jesus had already said it would happen. It is in Matthew chapter 24 verse 2, where he looked at those massive stones and said, "You see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." And that is precisely what happened. Stone after stone after stone pried apart until the wonder of the ancient world was a field of rubble. The tree withered in a single night. The temple withered in a single generation. The same verdict delivered at two different speeds. Leaves without fruit do not last. They never last. And here is what must not be missed, here at the heart of it, because it would be so easy to read all of this with a kind of grim satisfaction. There is none in Jesus. None. The same Messiah who walked up to that tree searching for fruit is the same Messiah who, that very week, stood on the slope of the Mount of Olives and looked down at the city that was about to reject him and wept over it. He did not curse from anger. He grieved. He came hungry for fruit, longing for it, aching to find even one early fig on the branch, and the emptiness he found broke his heart before it ever moved his hand. The God of this story is not an executioner glad to swing the axe. He is the gardener who begged for one more year, and another, standing in the orchard at dawn, hoping against hope to find figs and finding leaves. The judgment is real, but the tears come first. So now, after everything, go back to the very beginning, to that small detail almost everyone skips. It was not the season for figs. We started there, with a clue lying open on the table that no one notices because it seems too obvious to matter. And now you can see what it was doing there all along. It was never about the season. The season was never the point. A tree that honestly had no fruit because the time had not come would have stood there bare and truthful, and Jesus would have walked right past it the way he walked past every other bare tree on that road. He did not curse the trees that told the truth about being empty. He cursed the one that lied about being full. The clue about the season is there to strip away every excuse so that the only thing left standing is the real issue. Not timing, truth, the gap between what the tree advertised and what the tree actually held. And the disciples, who stood there as witnesses that first morning, learned something they would carry for the rest of their lives. The tree had fooled even them with its leaves. It had not fooled the one who walks past every appearance and looks for what is actually there. Because that is who he is. The same Jesus who cursed the barren tree turned around and taught his disciples how to grow roots, how to abide, how to draw real life from the true vine. The same Jesus who let the temple of stone wither promised to raise up the true temple in 3 days, in his own body, the real dwelling place of God among us. The same Jesus who exposed the lie of false fruit became himself the source of all real fruit, the vine in whom alone the branches can bear anything at all. Judgment and hope are not two stories here. They are one. He tears down the leaves so that he can give you roots, and so the question this whole story has been walking toward finally arrives, and it is a quiet one, meant just for you. When the Messiah comes close to your life, the way he came close to that tree on the road, when he draws near and looks past the distance and searches the branches up close, what does he find? Leaves or figs? The appearance of life or the reality of it? And I want to be so careful here, because the point of that question is not to shame you, not to send you home counting your failures. The man asking it wept over the city before he ever judged it. He is not standing over you with an axe. He is the gardener kneeling in the dirt, digging around your roots, asking for one more season. The whole invitation of this story is to stop spending your strength growing leaves for other people to admire, and to come instead and abide. To sink your roots down into him, and to let real fruit grow quietly from the inside, where only he can see it begin. If this study has meant something to you, if it has changed even a little the way you will read these chapters from now on, the very best way you can support what we're doing here is simple. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Leave a comment and let it be just one word, the name of the one kind of fruit you want the Lord to grow in you this season, and share this with someone you love who needs to hear it, because that, more than anything else, is how this reaches new people. And please, keep us in your prayers as we keep you in ours. May the God who comes looking for fruit find in you not a tree dressed up in borrowed leaves, but a life rooted deep and quietly bearing what is real. May you abide in the vine, and may his life rise up through you and feed every hungry traveller he sends down your road. Go in peace and be more than leaves. God bless you.